I picked up this DRO kit off of eBay recently. It comes with the DRO, both of the linear scales, various bits of bracketry, nuts and bolts, some covers, the instructions, all the little bits and pieces. And in this video I thought I'd show you how I fitted it to the lathe. And this is the lathe that we're going to be fitting it to. It's a Harrison VS330TR. It's a nice machine and I have it here in my home workshop running off of a rotary converter. I'll start by fitting the DRO display itself. It's just a basic 2-axis unit and it comes with this handy little bracket which should make fitting it a little bit easier. I'd like to get the DRO mounted somewhere around here like this, and there's a nice big flat bit on the back of the gearbox I can mount this arm on. I'll have to be a little bit careful where I drill the holes and try not to go all the way through. I think that should just about do it. I started by drilling the threads out of the mounting bracket. The bracket's designed to have the bolts go through a plate and then be screwed into the bracket, whereas I'd like to put the bolts through the bracket and then screw them into the back of the machine. I could then mark out the bolt pattern and very carefully drill blind holes into the back of the gearbox. I don't want to go all the way through as the gearbox is full of oil. I set the clutch on the combi drill nice and low so that when the tap hit the bottom of the blind hole it didn't snap the tap. I then just screwed the mounting plate down with some cap head screws. The arm was then reassembled. There's a little spacer that goes in the bracket to stop it getting crushed, and then a lock nut that goes on the bottom. There's also a locking bolt on the top of the arm just to stop it from swinging around. On the bottom of the screen there's a little mounting plate, and again this just gets fastened down with some cap head screws. The DRO screen goes onto the arm like this, and then just gets locked in place with a little nut on the bottom. The Z-axis scale has to be fitted on the back of the machine. That's because there isn't space on the front, so I pulled out the swarf tray so I could get access to the job. The kit came with various brackets which I then set about modifying to make sure that it all fit together nicely on this particular machine. Now what is it they say? Measure twice, cut once, isn't it? Well, I did that, and then after cutting the bracket in half that was perfectly adequate for the job, I welded it back together again. I feel like this could have all been avoided if I'd just read the instructions. Here's the completed bracket for the Z-axis reed head. Fortunately, the slots in the bracket lined up with a couple of existing holes in the saddle. I could then set about marking out for the linear scale. I centre punched and then drilled and tapped the holes for the screws that would mount the scale. The scale was then passed through the reed head bracket and nipped in place at the back of the machine. You'll notice that the hole is slightly slotted. This is just to ensure that you can adjust it to get it parallel with the bed of the machine. At the front of the machine, the bed steps in slightly. This leaves a small gap behind where the screw needs to go. It's important that this gap gets filled before the scale gets tightened down, otherwise the scale will bend. I just used a little stack of repair washers. I could then get it roughly level and nip the screw down. To check that the scale was parallel with the bed, I just set up a dial indicator on the carriage and drove it along the length of the machine. With the scale now parallel to the Z-axis, the reed head can be attached to the bracket which is attached to the carriage. Again, it's just some little cap head screws holding everything together. The slotted holes in the reed head bracket allow it to be pushed up until there's no play left in the system. Then the screws can be done up. Once they're tight, this little piece of red plastic can be removed, and that ensures the correct gap between the scale and the reed head. Plug the scale into the back of the DRO, and that's the Z-axis working. The kit came with a protective cover for the scale. Before installing it, I just ran a small bead of sealant along the top edge. It was then just screwed to the bed of the machine, being careful to make sure that there was clearance to the reed head bracket along its full travel. With the Z-axis complete, it's onto the X-axis. I'd like to mount the scale somewhere around here on the cross slide. The only slight problem is this V-groove in the back of the cross slide. It means I don't have a flat surface to screw into. So what I'm going to have to do is make a little angle bracket that screws into the top of the cross slide and then drops down behind the scale, and I can connect to that. To make this bracket, I just used a little bit of 20mm by 20mm aluminium angle. I removed the compound to make marking out a little bit easier. The new bracket needs a relief cut in it to clear the back of the compound, and to do that I needed to make a special tool first. It's just a little compass that locates on the pivot pin for the compound slide. I could then use the compass with a scribe to mark out the arc for the clearance cut for the compound.